Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On this week's podcast, we are going to continue our conversation about critical race theory, how to recognize it, and what you can do to confront this growing threat to our children, our families, our communities, and ultimately, this country. We're also going to discuss the textbooks being used specifically in Florida. But remember, these textbooks are being used across the country. Joining me today is PJTN Senior Academic Fellow, Dr. Sandra Alfonsi, to help inform our audience about this threat and what you can do to protect your children and this republic. If you missed last week's episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome back Dr. Sandra Alfonsi. Sandra, welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Yes, it's always a pleasure. I could just go on and talk to you for hours on end about the issues in education, and we are so grateful to have your participation. We're grateful to have you on the PJTN team. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Alfonsi is just a gem, and she's got an extensive background in education. She was formerly reviewing textbooks and standards instructional materials for Hadassah, and we are so fortunate to have her as part of PJTN's team as our senior academic fellow. So, Dr. Alfonsi, let's talk about, let's continue our conversation from last week about critical race theory, because this has been a major issue. I see some of the similarities with regards to Common Core and critical race theory. And the similarities that I see, especially, are how it is described. Because I remember, and you probably recall this too, when Common Core first came out, we kept hearing from educators and experts, they kept telling us that, Common Core is just about higher standards. All we could hear from these people were, it's all about higher standards. Don't you want higher standards for your children? Well, yeah, everybody wants higher standards. But how do you define Common Core? And you couldn't really, because they were countering the narrative, you couldn't really challenge what they were saying. So you had to show them. You had to give them the evidence. You had to show parents. You had to show citizens, this is what you're looking for to see if Common Core is being taught in your children's school. And the same is true about critical race theory. We see the same argument. People are saying, we're not teaching critical race theory. That's taught in university and blah, blah, blah. Well, we know that that's not true. So Dr. Alfonsi, let's start again. Let's talk about defining what critical race theory is and how to recognize it.
Well, basically, in my opinion, critical race theory, CRT, is the propagation of white privilege. It is that the critical race, actually the one that is critical in doing the damage, it's the white, and the ones that it's critical against are the people of color, specifically the Black Americans, and they have still used the terminology of African Americans, which is because the similarity between critical race and the BLM is that this is a systemic racist country and it is a slave nation. So critical race theory is that race, as opposed to the socioeconomic level that we had under Marxism, that race is the denominator here, and that people are judged by their color and by their culture. And there is a very strong linkage between the two, the race and the culture. Whereas Black Lives Matter, it's really an offshoot from the Black Power, but they do not call the Americans blacks. They call them African Americans to make sure that the slavery issue and that this is a slave nation is maintained. The critical race theory actually has moved away from the use of the term. They do not use African Americans as much as they do use black, but they to when they wanted to drive a division between the civil rights movement in the United States, which was for the benefit, starting out with the terminology of people of color. We now have, it's very strange because the civil rights movement came up when Negro was replaced by colored people, and so they were people of color. Critical race theory has veered away from Black Lives Matter's insistence upon the African Americans. They have actually, the critical race theory resembles a lot the ethnic studies of the state of California, where they delve into the racist problems of people of color. Right. How they refer to them as POCs, people of color. So they have the black, they have the brown, they have the red, and every variation in between. And the critical race theory is that it is the whites that are the oppressors. It is the people of color that has fallen to these oppressors. With the white, comes along white privilege. Not only are the whites the oppressors in the critical race theory, the designation of white is probably linked to, not probably, it's linked to white privilege, but there's a great emphasis on, in addition to minorities being serviced under the Civil Rights Act, some of the privileges went to whites as well. So there's a denigration of the term white, and there's the critical race, which is that they believe, well, when I say believe, don't really know what they believe, but they purport to be the anti-racist movement. That what they do under critical race theory is actually anti-racism. We are the racists and they are the anti-racists that fight racism, which is in itself, it's almost as bizarre language as Common Core. I have a problem with Common Core because to me, if it was common, it was base, and if it was core, it was at the center. And to me, Common Core education meant all, and it meant a middle ground acceptable to everyone. So I had a problem just with the terminology of Common Core because common means ordinary. So they were purporting an education system which was supposed to, the core meant reading, writing, and arithmetic, and so common was to be open to everyone and equal to everyone. So Common Core pre-shadows in many ways the critical race and the movement and the fact of equity. It's, the equity and diversity and inclusion. And I feel that I think Common Core, if they had waited long enough, would have developed the diversity and the inclusion and the equity. They would have developed the usage of these three words. It is used throughout the. It's interesting in the textbooks that you and I, or the publishers that you and I looked at as being possible, possibly their books would come into Tennessee. We found those publishing houses that were dedicated to Common Core were the ones that were teaching that they were in their books DEI, the diversity and the equity and the inclusion. And
Mm-hmm.
in CRT, it's most different because diversity is there, but it's only diversity of color. It's
Mm-hmm.
not
Right.
diversity. That's a different diversity. It's, the 50 Shades of Gray. It's 50 shades of people of color, and
Right.
that's what they are. So that's how I look at it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that Black Lives Matter is the most dangerous curriculum because
Mm-hmm.
it incorporates the anti-police, and it incorporates the violence, and it incorporates the language that Black students, African American students who were condemned to go to the white school system, they're the
Mm-hmm.
ones that end up in prison and such. So it teaches overtly, it teaches
Mm-hmm.
violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The
You know,
critical there ignites it, but it doesn't teach it as openly.
right. So there's another, sinister component, Dr. Alfonsi, the ethnic studies model curriculum, and I'd like to focus on that for just a minute, because as you all know, PJTN's mission is to educate Christians to stand with our Jewish brethren. And of course, now it's Jews and Christians to stand with our Jewish brethren against the rise of global anti Semitism. Now, one of the components of the ethnic studies model curriculum, which I thought was outrageous, was how they divided. Initially, the curriculum was anti Semitic. It did not treat the Jews as a minority when they clearly are a minority in any country where Jews reside. But the fact that they wouldn't include the Jews, and they took so much heat about it, there was so much opposition nationwide against this ethnic studies model curriculum, that they decided to even divide up the Jewish community, and basically accusing the white Ashkenazi Jews from Europe of being under the category of white privilege, and separating them out from their Jewish brethren who may come from Arab countries who have a different color of skin. Even Africa, you have the Ethiopians. Those are considered by this ethnic studies model curriculum, or these critical race theorists, they're considered minorities, but not the Jews who are of European background. To me, this is outrageous on its face that this is even happening, that now they're even dividing up the Jewish community and lumping the white European Jews into the category of white privilege, being racist. It's absolutely astounding that this was allowed to pass in California. It is now required teaching in the state of California. Every child is going to have to graduate with some type of ethnic studies model curriculum lessons that they're going to have had to take during their K through 12 years. So it's just outrageous. What are your thoughts with regards to dividing up the Jewish community like that, Dr. Alfonsi?
First of all, it shows, aside from the prejudice and the problems, it shows the lack of knowledge altogether of the history of the building of America, because the first Jews to come to what then became the United States, they were here before it
Mm-hmm.
became a nation. The first Jews were Sephardic Jews that had been expelled, that had not been killed, evidently. They missed the Inquisition,
Mm-hmm.
or they were expelled. They went into Holland. They came over to the Caribbean, and from there they did not want to go back to Portugal. They didn't want to go back to Europe, and so
Mm-hmm.
they set out to come and settle what was to become the United States. So historically speaking, the Sephardic role in what became the United States preceded that of the Ashkenazi Jews, because they fled we have to be blunt about it. They didn't. Some came over to find a better life. Most came over to avoid the growing pogroms and the problems of the anti-Semitism in Europe. That being said, the Sephardics who fought in the revolution, fought for this country, they have a long, really eloquent history. It was the Ashkenazis that came from Europe came with the ability in business. They came over and they went into starting schools in New York, and they had a different history, and therefore they were much more apparent. Uh, they were part of. They were a minority, but they were considered, because they were Jews. They had a tremendous problem with anti-Semitism. The ethnic studies in California did not really want to incorporate the Jews as a minority. What they managed to do with the Sephardic Jews and the Jews from Arab lands is that they tacked them in as part of the Pax, the people of color,
Right.
and therefore I think that this issue is going to come up again, as far as people have been telling me in California. So you'll have another chance to put your your research into it with them. They made a very large mistake in that by doing that, they were not given any kind of credit for who they are, what they did. They were actually victims of their own people. That is what the ethnic studies has done with the people of color, the white supremacists and the people with the white privilege were those that were the oppressors. And we have the same vocabulary of the way they discuss and they describe the Israelis and the Palestinians, that the Israelis are the oppressors, the white Jews that came from Europe. If you look at how they came and what happened to them over here in the States, to say that they were the aggressors, but what they've done is to pit those Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, against the Sephardic and the Middle Eastern Jews, and they have played upon, whether we call it racism or whether we call it ethnic bias. There are problems, like in the United States, of what they call what are intermarriages in the United States between the whites and the Black Americans. There's that prejudice. There's the cultural differences, and the people that developed this cultural ethnic studies, were schooled enough, because they've heard enough about it, to know that the same problem exists in the quote unquote intermarriage between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewry, and the same, and especially the third category where that I'm laughing because it was difficult to find the description. So you had Sephardic, you had Ashkenazi, you had Sephardic, and then you had the Ethiopians. So nobody knew quite where to put anyone, but the ethnic studies in California did an amazing job in turning the people of color, Jewish people of color, and that's how they did it. They called the Jewish people of color. So they had right there the critical race theory because of the Jewish people of color, and they pitted them sociologically and economically, because the Sephardic Jews took longer, when in the history of the development of America, to develop their businesses, whereas the European Jews that came over had a different mindset, and they fit in more easily to the cultural background of the United States than did the Sephardic Jews. And that's why you find the communities divided as such, that the Sephardic Jews didn't really know where to live.
Interesting.
And that's when you go to, like, let's say Great Neck in New York, you find that neighborhoods, there are big synagogues, but they are the Sephardic synagogues. and that they built their own community with their own butcher shops, with their own stores, their own restaurants. They are not interspersed as a Jewish community with the Ashkenazi businesses and the Ashkenazi synagogues. They have, it's like the roadmap to different cultures, and the ethnic studies really, they identified and they drew the bridge between the the Ashkenazi, who became the aggressors and became the perpetrators of white privilege, and the people of color, whom they didn't really want to include, but they included because it made their argument and weakened any mirage of Jewish unity. And it's a problem. The American Jewish community has never been totally united, as I would say most of the Christian American communities, with their similarities, they have more in common than you have the Jewish community living together, because when you don't know, and you don't know where the anti-Semitism comes from, everyone is suspicious, and it's a different mindset. So
Right.
that's how I see it.
Well, that is very insightful. And, I found it problematic too, as well. I know you do. The people who actually drafted the ethnic studies model curriculum, there were people tied to Black Lives Matter, which I will always preface Black Lives Matter as an anti-Semitic racist organization and group with its leaders who were Marxists. And they launched a all-out pogrom in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. And, of course, they never apologized for what happened. They incited that violence against the Jewish community in Los Angeles. And so that told me everything I wanted to know about the ethnic studies group and the people that were associated with drafting it. So let's move to talking about textbooks, because many of our audience knows that we were involved in Florida with helping to review and draft the civics and Holocaust standards over the last couple of years. And the textbooks, or the as we were reviewing the current standards in the state of Florida, we saw a huge gaping hole in the history, the civic history of the United States, but even, our history, and also the history of our founding. And we were honored to be able to have been invited to participate. And it really was a blessing, because we were able to revise the standards as such that they are the most comprehensive civic standards in the country. Many of you may not be aware that for the first time in history, we have a state whose Department of Education is required to teach K through 12. That's 1.8 million students in the state of Florida every year about our civic history, about civics in general, about our history. Some of the things that our children now will learn that they were not learning before was the role that the Hebrew Bible played in the founding of our nation, the role that the Hebrew Bible played in the drafting of our founding documents. It will tell the story of George Washington and his relationship with the members of the Toro Synagogue. We often hear people say that the United States is a Christian nation. We need to correct people when they do that, when they say that. We are not a Christian nation. We are a Judeo-Christian nation. As Dr. Alfonsi mentioned previously, that the Sephardic Jews came over here in 1492 to seek a place of refuge because of the Inquisition, because it had been launched. And Columbus, who was a Jew, along with the majority of people, if not all of them, in his crew that sailed, were also Jews. They were looking for a safe harbor, if you will, a safe place for Jews to go to. So there's all that history that we aren't teaching our children that they need to understand, because the members of the Touro Synagogue, after Washington won the American Revolution, with the help, mind you, of a wealthy Jewish banker, Haim Solomon, who bankrolled the American Revolution, died without a dime to his name. But George Washington received a letter from the members, the congregation of the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, and it's still there. I encourage our listeners, take a trip up to Massachusetts or to Rhode Island, go to the Touro Synagogue, learn the history. But they wrote a letter to George Washington asking him, how will we fare after this revolution? Because historically, Jews do not fare well after revolutions are fought. They're forced to leave the country where they resided. And Washington went to the Touro Synagogue himself. He quoted from the book of Isaiah. He quoted from the book of Leviticus. And he said that you will sit under your own vine tree and you will know peace. Basically telling the Jews of the Touro Synagogue congregation that your days of wandering are over. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, because we haven't taught that history to our children, we have a growing problem with anti-Semitism in the United States. Dr. Alfonsi, what are your thoughts with regards to our involvement, and how did you see this as, as an academic, somebody who's been involved in this? How important was this that PJTN was involved in helping to draft these standards to put the first state in our country on a new path, in a new direction, teaching our children about this important part of our history?
To be very honest about this, Laurie, I think that the fact that you were involved, we were involved, and we were asked to participate before we even addressed the issue of what we added and fixed in the civics. I think that if this had not happened, that Governor DeSantis, who is one of the finest political leaders that we have, there would have been no way for him to learn that what we found was that the Board of Education and those who wrote the standards and were directing the education had been infiltrated by the left, and that the standard under which the state of Florida was functioning when it comes to civics and to the government was basically headed towards globalism. It definitely was anti-constitution, anti-rule of law. It's, as you said, it left out or removed the Judeo-Christian tradition of our country. I think that that's, that it's important for people to know that, but I think that most important was the discovery of the anti-constitution, the anti-rule of law, and that and the globalism, and the fact that illegal immigration was not only not frowned upon, it was the explanation of immigration versus alien immigration, immigrants versus alien immigrants was not in there. The development of the green card as a means of naturalization, that what makes this country, what makes it a constitutional republic, it had become a democracy. The founding fathers were basically, when not eliminated, they were scorned upon. The country was presented in as a beginning, not as much as it developed into when BLM came around. But already the whole issue that we were a racist country and that the Constitution really did not, what was left out of the standards was the fact that yes, there were founding fathers that were slaveholders, that was being taught. What was not being taught is that they left the door open for the development of the amendments to the Constitution, the freeing of the slaves and such, and that therefore the country was not born on racism or racist. So I think that just being able to see how it was being taught, that the Board of Education, Department of Education, in my view, had been infiltrated, and that this, the fact that the way in which education was to be carried out was that the standards were to give the direction to the publishing houses of how to develop the textbooks with which the state would teach. And then in this case, it turned out that the publishing houses, in this case, we found out what the kind of the civic standards are, but the publishing houses have a much greater not rule, but a greater role in how education is taught. So I think that, yes, making sure that we have the Judeo-Christian concept. We have so much to fight with the growth of Islam in the United States that if we can in any way put back Judeo-Christian with the hyphen meaning equality, and put back the Mosaic law, which puts back the rule of law, those things are imperative as long as they are taught correctly. But my pride is the fact that we discovered the hole into which the state of Florida was falling, and those standards were horrific.
Right. Well, and it made sense because prior to reviewing those standards, and really what helped get us on their radar to invite us to participate, was that the fact that we were finding curriculum and textbooks that were in violation of state statutes in Florida. And when we brought it to the attention of the Department of Education, that was one of the reasons behind us being allowed to inviting us to participate, because Governor DeSantis had just recently returned from Jerusalem a year prior to us getting started and signed into law a bill, an anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which basically defined what anti-Semitism was, banned anti-Semitism in Florida schools. And of course, then we know that more recently, he signed an executive order banning critical race theory. So we've got two issues that the governor has taken issue with to remove from Florida public schools. And really, the schools and the curriculum have already been infiltrated with this content. And you've been doing some more research. We found several supplemental materials that were anti-Semitic. We've seen some of the content that has been introduced to the children, but you've been digging into the textbooks. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, these textbooks being used in Florida are really being used across the country. They may have a different cover, they may have a different state that they're tied into, but it's really the same propaganda that our children are being subjected to. And it's why our children hate America, why they think that we're a racist country. Unfortunately, this has been introduced to our children. Dr. Alfonsi, share with us what you are finding, because you're digging back into these books. You have a whole group of them. What are you finding in the textbooks? What is it that's making our children hate America?
To put it really bluntly, it is the fact that American exceptionalism has been removed from the textbooks. That is to say, anything and everything that America has done good for its people and for the world is eliminated from the textbooks. Why? Because if we want to be realistic, and it's very painful because I've been watching this for many years before this malady got a name to it, we have been under the influence of Marxists. We have been under the influence of those who, when I say let's forget, I don't mean overlook. Let's forget for a minute the discrepancy between a constitutional republic and a democracy. So let's just say right now that the democracy or America's democratic principles, which are assured by the constitutional republic. So let's just use the word democracy for for a common commodity, that democracy has come up against communism. Capitalism has been, if you look at America at its greatest point, it is the greatest of the capitalistic nations, but capitalism has become a word that was shredded and stomped upon by communism. So to say that America's grandeur, that the greatest time is when it was capitalism and it was growing, and the socioeconomic level of its people were going up at the same time that we were grappling with the slavery issue, and then with the freeing of the slaves and the socioeconomic deficits in the American Black community. We were grappling with all of that, and we were, when I say successful, there's nothing that's 100% successful, but the downward slope was not there, and the race relations in the country were improving, and the level of education. This is where people should have noticed, because the reports came out, and I was aware of them for quite some time, that the placement of American students in the level of world education slipped drastically, and it slipped drastically at the point where the democracy of the United States was under assault, and Marxism was attempting to make one unified people. If you look at the Soviet Union, which is Russia, the Soviet Union, you look at China, you look at this America, to bring Marxism over. And I found this fascinating, that the left-wing Marxists in the United States were smart enough, because some of them are brilliant, but they were smart enough to know that the violence of European and of Russian and Chinese, the communism and the Marxism, that would not go over here, because the Americans would not be beaten into a frenzy with the revolution. And the leftist Marxists that came over here and came to the States, and they brought it with them, but they brought an understanding that you cannot have the Marxism of Marx, you cannot have the social differentiation, that's not going to work. So that they brought it to the university, and I remember growing up with a television program called The Halls of Ivy, and I thought, look at that academia, it's so noble, it's so perfect, it's exactly where I want to be. And then I found out that there were a lot of snakes in the ivy that are going up and down the walls of academia. And these lecturers found their place on the college campus. And this, I have to say honestly, that it's because of American freedom, guaranteed by the Constitution, which none of these people want to remember, that we have a possibility of academic freedom. We have the possibility of using any textbooks we want on the university level. And so these Marxists moved into academia, and they are the ones that said, okay, but that type of Marxism will not grow over here. We can't topple the government. So that is what we found, you and I found in Florida, is that had moved directly and very, I think it moved swiftly, considering that the standards that we got were already in effect for 5 years. It means that it went into the university system, it came out of the university system, and it infiltrated into the State Department of Education. And I think that's the way it happened. And then, unfortunately, the problem with what they were called the problem with the African Americans, we passed through the stage of the change of language. I mean, the Negroes to the coloreds to the African Americans to the American blacks that said none of our people were from Africa. We are not African Americans. We're Black Americans, like you have white Americans and that. The problem that we ran into, that while the Marxism that was formulated on the college campus, it couldn't have the violence that the Marxism and communism had under Stalin and such, and in China it couldn't have that. But what it had instead, and what it found, and what found them, when you look at the Black Lives Matter, when you look at Black Power, when you look at Stokely Carmichael, you look at it, found the violence elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So the Marxism, the violence of the Marxism, that is what they found. And that is also not peculiar in the sense of it's what makes it particular. That's why Hamas is involved with all of this, because they found the replacement for the violence and the bloodletting and the human devastation that you found in Russia and you found in China. Over here, they understood that their brand of Marxism had to be, for lack of a better word, intellectual. And to be intellectual, it means it had to take the textbooks.
Right.
And the textbook, it took the country, because they took out everything and they replaced. And when you look at the founding fathers and you look at the way that that is presented, and then Marxism is atheist, it wouldn't have been very easy to apply Marxism, where you have a Judeo-Christian tradition, and then you have the latent anti-Semitism that has always been in this country, and it will always be in this country. So all of that I think, played right into it, and people don't want to understand because it looks ugly. The pomp and glory of when you go to the university and you graduate and you wear a cap and gown, and you march to cap and gown music, you march to that, and then you get up to the master's degree, and then you get the PhD with the velvet colors that show what you've learned. There's a pomp and glory to that we look at that without realizing that inside of that is the movement to destroy America.
Correct.
And that's how I look at it. And therefore, the Judeo-Christian tradition of this country has two enemies. One enemy is Marxism, which is atheist, and the other, unfortunately and realistically, is the anti-Semitism, not only around the world, but we have to be open, because I work with you and we work with the Jewish communities, with the Christian communities, but the anti-Semitism, the desire to rid the world of Judaism and rid the world of the Jews, we live with that. And so to see this is a Judeo-Christian country, the country has done its best in marketing to make sure that that isn't apparent. And you need to look at, this sounds perhaps childish, but you just need to look at the windows at Christmas time to see that it's not a Judeo-Christian, but only under force of, do they make notice that there are Jews? And in the school, they use not everyone is against religion in the school, the separation of church and state. It is also a form of anti-Semitism, because when you read the description of world religions and how they are to be taught, Judaism has the same role, or the same role is given to Judaism in education as to Christianity, to Islam, and everything. But the latent anti-Semitism, it's very difficult for well-meaning Christians to look at the word Judeo-Christian. And I didn't know you during the era when Macmillan and Company, when they published, they were the first of all, to publish the word Holocaust with a lowercase h, but they were the first publishing house to remove the hyphen between Judeo-Christian tradition. And it was very difficult to tell them and to tell the people, including the Jews who didn't understand why it was so important, to say that Judeo-Christian with the hyphen gives equality to both the Judaism and the Christianity as the founding religions of this country.
Right.
And that was it's what I've heard too many times, and it makes me laugh. I don't laugh to anybody's face, but Dr. Alfonsi, there's so many important things in the world to be upset about. Why are you upset over a hyphen? And I listen and I answer at times, but I'm not flippant about it
Right.
because it is equality. And we've chased after, and you know me very well by now that
Mm-hmm.
when I say that the Jews have chased after the equality. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something which is very difficult to perceive because if we own the world, we own the media, we own the banks, we own so many things. I don't know why we have any problems, to be honest with
That's right. I love to hear that. I love when people say that.
you.
Oh,
But
it.
what we don't own, Laurie, is the hyphen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. And we do have a major problem, especially on our university campuses with anti Semitism. We run into it all the time in Tennessee. For 5 years in a row, I have tried to pass a law that clearly defines what anti Semitism is. In fact, we're using the definition that our U.S. State Department uses. But for some reason, of course, we know the reason, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville every year stands in the way of us getting that bill passed. Why? Because one of the largest perpetrators of anti Semitic incidents in the state when it comes to campuses, higher ed campuses, it's UT Knoxville. And there have been numerous incidents that have occurred. We've seen more recently in K through 12 the removal of Mouse, a book on the Holocaust. We've seen um, uh, anti-Semitic innuendo that children are being introduced to, pornography, belittling the Jewish author. Of course, he wrote this content about himself, about his community, about his family. But you see how it has even infiltrated our community in Tennessee. We have fought to try to get a definition so that when an anti-Semitic incident occurs on one of our campuses, and it could be K through 12, it could be higher ed, but it would have a definition that would clearly define what constitutes an anti-Semitic incident. And if there is an incident that occurs, it will trigger the U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Department to investigate, especially investigate UTK for its numerous incidents. But UTK stands in the way of us getting this legislation passed. And we've run into a brick wall again. I have great confidence in the Speaker of the House that he is going to help us to get this passed once and for all, because there is a growing threat on our campuses. It should not be tolerated. We should be grateful because, that if we look throughout history, Dr. Alfonsi, at what happened to the nations that attacked their Jewish citizenry, those nations were brought to naught. They were great empires in their day until they turned against the Jews. I remember having a conversation with a parent who is an attorney, and they were in New Jersey, and they were looking for universities to put their children in, and they considered UTK, and also their son was considering Vanderbilt. But because of the number of anti-Semitic incidents that have occurred on both campuses, this father told me he was not going to send his child to get a degree in Tennessee because he could not be assured, because of our policies, because we won't condemn anti-Semitism, we'll make nice and support Israel by passing a resolution supporting the state of Israel in her war on terror. But God forbid we actually have a definition that somebody could violate and trigger a civil rights lawsuit against the university for allowing that type of activity to go on unpunished. Your thoughts, Dr. Alfonsi?
Well, you and I can go back to a conversation which we had 2 years ago about the presence of neo-Nazis, perhaps, in
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. And we went back to the Paperclips project
Mm-hmm.
when the Nazis were brought over by the United States to help develop the bomb. And you asked what appeared to be a very simple, not simplistic, a very simple question. Do I think that any of the offspring of those Nazis could be responsible for the block in the Senate? And you raised a question that very few people would have been brave enough to raise, let alone to think of both. And I think that neo-Nazism is in this country. I do think that in Tennessee, where you have basic uh, medieval Christian anti-Semitism,
Mm-hmm.
which has never left this country, where you now have the proliferation of mosques being put up, and you have that virulent anti-Semitism,
Mm-hmm.
that the offspring of the Nazis, they would be the correct age, and they would have easily infiltrated because they came from quote unquote very respectable, educated people who were brought over here from Nazi Germany to develop the killer bomb, a bomb. So that's my thought, is that your question was remains. It wasn't that it
Mm-hmm.
was, because it never was answered.
Mm-hmm.
And since you've given me you've given me the ability to talk on your podcast, I'm making a very cultured request that if there are donors out there who would like to help remove the growth of neo-Nazism as it goes side by side and in hand with leftist Marxism to decimate the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes hand in hand with the proliferation of mosques. And never think that Muslim anti-Semitism is only anti-Semitism. You just have to look at right now what is being done, and it continues to be done, to the
Mm-hmm.
destruction of the Christian world in not only the United States but across the world. So
Right.
I'm I'm very humbly requesting that if any of you, if you yourselves cannot help with that, if you know people, guide Laurie to that, because we have so many walls and to take down, and we have very
Mm-hmm.
few doors to open. And I truly believe that behind this closed door, there is a frightening answer. And when you look at right now, you look at Russia and you look at the Ukraine, we'd better look at the United States quickly.
Yeah.
So that are my thoughts, Lori.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Alfonsi. Well said. And yes, this is a major threat to our community. And it's critically important that we, as people of faith, Jews and Christians, must take a stand. I want to talk a little bit more next week when we have you back on about the infiltration in our higher ed campuses, our teaching campuses, where we are sending our kids off to these education schools to learn how to teach. That's a whole nother segment of our podcast, and we're going to tackle that next week. I'm hoping that Dr. Alfonsi will clear her busy schedule to make room for my for our podcast so we can continue this conversation.
My busy schedule revolves around you. So I'm delighted to do this because it's, except for not seeing your face, it's a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you as well. I always so enjoy your insight. And we have so much work to do, ladies and gentlemen. And I just am so grateful for Dr. Alfonsi for her understanding of the threat that we are facing in our community. And yes, if you have not read the book Paperclips, I encourage you to do your research about that. We will talk more about that in the coming programs, because I do believe the next generation of Nazis are here. They haven't left. Their family was brought over here, compliments of our federal government and your tax dollars, ladies and gentlemen. And we just recently, I think it was last year, there was maybe 2 years ago, there was a Nazi guard who was living close to Oak Ridge, 92 years old. And I don't know who turned him in, but a federal judge in Memphis rescinded his immigration papers and sent him back to Germany. What I don't understand is why that former Nazi prison guard was not arrested and tried with crimes against humanity. Why did he get off? Why was he allowed to come into our country in the first place? How did he get here? This is frightening, ladies and gentlemen, because the second generation is being raised up. There are Nazis that are still the white supremacists. You know, Tennessee also is where the Ku Klux Klan resided, was founded. And so there is that history. We know that S.A. Byerfield, who was a dry goods merchant owner right in Franklin, Tennessee, was murdered by the KKK because he hired blacks in his store as clerks. So, and he's actually buried in the Nashville Jewish Cemetery. So there is a connection here, ladies and gentlemen. There is a history here with regards to Tennessee. And I believe God is exposing it, that it is being, and I think that's why we have such resistance when it comes to passing a law, a simple law, just to define what anti-Semitism is. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to go to our website to learn more about how to take back local control of your children's education, because ultimately it starts with you. If you are interested in hosting a summit in your community to help educate, motivate, and activate your county to flip your school board, that's what we're focused on at PJTN. And if you're not familiar with the organization, go to pjtn.org and sign up to get on that mailing list. But that's our focus this year. This is an election year. You are witnessing parents and citizens across this country who have had enough. They have drawn a line in the sand. They have said, not on my watch. You are not going to use my child as a propaganda guinea pig. We saw that in San Francisco with the recent recall of 3 school board members by a liberal community. San Francisco, only 6% of the voters in San Francisco are Republicans. These were Democrats. And it goes to prove what I have been saying all along, because I have traveled across this country over the last decade, showing parents and citizens the content that is being used in our schools to teach our children, the anti-Semitic content. And it didn't matter if it was a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal in that room when I was going through the presentation. When the presentation was done, the response from both sides of the aisle was outrage. And one woman I'll never forget, a Democrat, she was so angry at the content, the anti-Semitic content. She said, "What is DeVos doing about this problem?" And I responded to her, that's a great question, because unfortunately there are holdovers in the Department of Education, the swamp, who would deny me access to the secretary. PJTN published a white paper reviewing the 11 disciplines of education. We showed the content that was being taught to the children in the schools. It was outrageous. We finally got it to President Trump through an Israeli ambassador, but we couldn't get it to the Secretary of Education because the people that were in the Department of Education didn't want her to see what was actually being taught to our children. And so that's why what we're doing, it's like what Dr. Alfonsi said, what we're doing is so critically important, ladies and gentlemen. This is foundational for the future of the United States of America. If we are going to hang on to our republic, we are going to have to fight for it. But we're going to have to fight for it through our children, because we've lost 2 generations of children to this propaganda. That's why their families are split. I hear this all the time. I don't know who my child is. My child isn't thinking critically or rationally anymore. That's what the education system has done to our children. We're going to talk about that next week. We're going to go into what teachers are teaching in their teacher's edition, ladies and gentlemen. I keep calling on our parents and citizens to review their children's textbooks. Well, you need to review the teacher's edition of your child's textbook, because therein lies the rest of the story. So again, if you're interested in hosting a summit, we'll come to your community. We will help you flip your school board like we did a decade ago. There were 6 school board members that were up for re-election. We brought every one of them down. Now is the time to do it, ladies and gentlemen. This is an election year. Now is the time to act. The irons are hot. And we're seeing this movement across the country where more and more parents are getting involved in this process, and they are winning. So I hope you enjoyed this program. We're going to post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and threatening our Judeo-Christian values. And we cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. We are watchmen. We're standing watch. We're looking for the enemy. But when the watchman sounds the alarm and warns the inhabitants of the people, it is the responsibility of the people to act. But if the people don't act, it won't be held against that watchman. God will not judge that watchman, because the watchman warned his neighbors. He warned his family. He warned his friends. And that's what we have to do, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot sit back and just say, oh, that was an interesting podcast. I learned something. No, ladies and gentlemen, you have to help sound the alarm in your county. I can't fight this battle. Dr. Alfonsi can't fight this battle in your county. You have to take responsibility. And I want to urge you to please prayerfully consider what we're asking for you to do, because this isn't going to go away, and somebody isn't going to save us. The Calvary is not coming, ladies and gentlemen. It is us. And if we will do our part, God Almighty Himself will do His. But we have to take that step. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, we need you. You can help support this effort and more programs like this one for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines. But we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. I want to leave you with the sobering statement by Abraham Lincoln when he said, "The philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next." God bless you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.